Are we running? Looks like we're running. Okay. Welcome back to the channel. Welcome if you are new. So, like most people, I've been watching this hurricane spin up in the Gulf of Mexico. Hurricane Helene, I think they're calling it. Why don't I have an image over here? I'm going to assume this works out okay. Oh, there it is. That took a long time. Anyway, Hurricane Helene spinning up in the Gulf of Mexico. This is another in a series of Gulf hurricanes. Traditionally, a lot of our hurricanes in the U.S., well, even in the Caribbean islands and Cuba and Puerto Rico, come from Africa and cross the South Atlantic before they arrive in those places I mentioned. So this season, the number of hurricanes coming from the North Atlantic is tiny. In fact, they were specifying a record-breaking hurricane season, but it hasn't panned out that way. And not because they were wrong about conditions. The conditions are quite conducive to hurricanes. It's just that all the hurricanes that would have come from Africa didn't, and that's most of them. As such, a lot of the hurricanes that we've been dealing with have actually spawned in the Gulf of Mexico itself. Now, this is a big problem. This is a big problem for most people that live in the Gulf states, Florida, for example, or the Carolinas, or Georgia, because they're kind of accustomed through just historical reality that you're going to have lots of warning about your hurricanes because they're going to come from Africa. And the newsmen and women, they'll point out the tropical depressions and how they're spinning up and becoming amazing, and they're going to come ashore, and then there's all these different places they could come ashore, but you have a week worth of warning, or even 2 weeks. When most or nearly all your hurricanes are spinning up in the Gulf of Mexico, that's kind of our backyard, and people just don't know what to make of that, and it's really close, and it's not doing the normal thing. And most of what people know about the weather is actually what they've just sort of learned from, what do you want to call it, personal experience. They don't really understand the science of any of this stuff. They listen to the news, and the news people will tell them what's going on, or they won't. And so if a hurricane spins up in the Gulf of Mexico and it's only going to take it 2 days to show up, and during most of that time it's just a tropical depression in the Gulf of Mexico, then people don't feel like it can possibly be a problem. So I had been thinking about that, and I was thinking about how this hurricane season is so much different. I have heard, although I haven't seen any official scientific discussion about it, but I heard that part of what's happening with the traditional African-based hurricane cyclogenesis, part of what's unhinging that and making that part of it not happen is global heating. And then I didn't hear too much about why that is, or why they know that is, or why they suspect that to be the case. So we'll just leave it at that. They're saying that climate change has affected cyclogenesis off of Africa. But it didn't affect cyclogenesis in the Gulf of Mexico, because we've had some major hurricanes come ashore, just originating in, south of Cuba or right in the Gulf of Mexico. And when I was thinking about that back in August, I said, that's going to really be a problem if that becomes the pattern, because you can get some pretty crazy hurricanes coming out of the Gulf of Mexico. Because remember, what makes these hurricanes spin up and get angry and violent is hot water. When they pass over hot water, hot ocean surface temperatures, then they steal that energy. They steal that energy and they spin themselves up with that. Most people don't know that, but that's what happens. It's not the long distance from Africa that spins them up. It's the hot water in the Gulf of Mexico, or for other practical purposes, in the South Atlantic. So you can actually get some pretty nasty shit coming out of the Gulf of Mexico, and it originates there. So I did what I call a mockumentary. I did a little drama It turned out to be 2 hours. It was kind of exhausting. I don't know if I'll ever do another one. It's linked in the description. On exactly this scenario. And in fact, what's happening with Hurricane Helene, even though it's been 3 weeks, is kind of what I imagined would happen. I imagined it would happen this way, that a nothing tropical depression or tropical storm, no real structure, but big, really big, would originate in a place people don't really associate with cyclogenesis or hurricane genesis. And it would originate down there, and then it would cross over Cuba, enter the Gulf of Mexico, no one really paying attention, and then just out of nowhere, find conditions perfect and spin up into a major hurricane. In fact, in my mockumentary, I have it spinning up into an unspecified category because it goes beyond category 5. Way beyond category 5. More like category 6 or 7, if there was such a category, which there is not, nor will there ever be. Even if we have hurricanes that would venture into that realm, we're never going to have those designations. And I discussed that actually in the video. The person in the video is an engineer. The character in the video that I play is an engineer and has given a lot of thought to why people still can't talk about that event, the one he and his family survived, in clear terms, that the nation just can't discuss it. So I put some thought into it. It is the mockumentary, again linked in the description, is completely fictional and completely unscripted. I didn't really script it. I just thought about it for a while, and then I sat down and pretended to be an engineer who survived a Category 7 hurricane in the Florida Panhandle. So how does Hurricane Helene match up? How does the reality of Hurricane Helene match up with my fictional thing? Well, in the ways I just described. It came out of nowhere, rapidly intensified, no one was paying attention. In fact, in my mockumentary, it came ashore so fast that the Hurricane Center didn't even have a chance to name it. It just remained unnamed. And by the way, that has happened. There was a hurricane that came ashore in the west of Mexico, so it's in the Pacific Ocean now. Came ashore in the west of Mexico and hit Acapulco, the resort city, and completely destroyed it. Of course, the U.S. news didn't carry hardly any discussion of it at all. But what I thought was most interesting of that was, for one thing, it formed in a part of the hydrosphere, the oceans, that doesn't generally spawn dangerous hurricanes. And it was a dangerous hurricane. And it was a nothing burger for a long time. And people thought, oh, it's just going to be a tropical storm at worst. And, a little bit of rain and some wind and it'll go away. And it spun into the reality of this storm, which it did get a name. I think it got a name. It may have gotten a name. The one from the Pacific Ocean may have actually gotten a name. But I'm not real sure on that. I'd have to look that up. I should have looked it up before I mentioned it. But anyway, I didn't. So it came ashore as like a category 4 or 5. So it went from nothing. It went from 0 to 100 in a day and wiped out Acapulco. And I don't know what their status is today. And that's what got me thinking about these storms that are so abrupt and so difficult to categorize and so difficult to talk about ahead of time because they just come out of nowhere. I mean, they can't come out of nowhere, right? They come off the ocean. We have satellites that watch these things. We have radar stations. And maybe Mexico isn't as on top of things as we are in Florida. But in any case, in Mexico, it caught everybody off guard. Everybody. We don't talk about that. There's no discussion of that having happened in Mexico. And so I did my mockumentary kind of imagining that it happened in Florida. It's something that just came out of nowhere overnight. Nobody thought it was a problem. And even when it started to look like a problem and people could see that it was a problem, people just didn't believe it. They just chose not to believe it. And I discussed that in the drama about how unnerving that was. That people just didn't believe it. Just couldn't believe it. It's not going to be a problem. We get these all the time. It'll be nothing. Don't worry about it. you know, have a nice evening, go to dinner, get some wine, whatever. And then they're all dead. That's how the thing ends. Everybody dies. So, spoiler alerts, everybody dies but one family. And I think, and the reason I did it that way is because I think that's how it's going to be. I really do think so. It's a fictional account, but it's only fiction until it isn't. And when it happens, it's going to happen exactly as described in my mockumentary. People just aren't going to believe it. They're going to be in denial. They're going to say, yeah, what? We get hurricanes all the time. This came ashore so fast that they didn't even name it. Now, Helene has a name, so I guess that's not going to be part of the reality, is it? But I was looking at some maps of Helene's development. Let me see if I can find one here. Well, here's the map of it. What I want to point out here with this thing is that this hurricane. This is an old map right now. This is an old photo. Look how big this wind field is. It extends from the Yucatan Peninsula, like all the way to the Bahamas, and they're already getting. Things are more advanced than this picture. They're already getting soaking rains in Georgia from Hurricane Helene, and it hasn't moved much further than it is in this picture. Also, when they track these things at the Weather Service, they'll say, okay, on this day it's a tropical depression. On this day it's a hurricane. On this day it's a major hurricane. And there's usually a slow progression. It's a hurricane a long time before it becomes a major hurricane, and then maybe it comes ashore. This one, it goes straight from depression to hurricane to major hurricane, and then it comes ashore. That's both how fast it's happening and how little warning people are going to have. People will, they'll go to, they'll start their day in the morning thinking that there's a tropical depression off the west coast of Florida, and they'll try to come home at night, and they'll be driving home in a full-blown Category 3 hurricane. That's what this is going to do. And that's what happened. That was the premise of my mockumentary, that we have set up the Earth dynamic system to do this to us. This is not, although this is not how it usually works. This scenario, both my drama and Hurricane Helene, this setup is potentially going to be the way it's done in the future because of global heating. So I don't want to talk about this too much. I guess we'll see. This thing is supposed to come ashore Thursday-ish, Thursday late in the day. It has the potential to be an overnight hurricane when it does hit the Florida Panhandle. It will be bringing nighttime storm surge, nighttime torrential rains, nighttime hurricane force winds, and nighttime tornadoes. Some of these hurricanes will generate their own tornadoes. These are not the blue sky tornadoes you get in, say, the Midwest, where it's a beautiful day and then there's a hurricane or a supercell on the horizon, and you're looking up at blue skies and there's a supercell on the horizon, and you just know that can drop a funnel, and that's how you're going to get a tornado. This won't be doing that. These tornadoes are going to drop down in the middle of torrential rains, and there could be scores of them. And when you get a hurricane that's this size, this big, and this violent, it can generate all kinds of tornadoes all by itself. And there's no warning for these things. There's no supercells. There's nothing. It just spins up a tornado out of nowhere, and you get no warning. And it'll be nighttime, and you'll be in your home. You'll be asleep. Will the authorities even be out and about, ready to set off the tornado alarms, tornado sirens, so that you can get to your safe space? You can get to your bunker or your basement or wherever you have to go. Will they even be around to do that? They'll all be home asleep too, right? Are they going to have, all hands on deck, all night crew to monitor this thing and set off the sirens? Maybe, maybe not. So people could wake up in the morning after this thing comes through Florida. They could wake up in the morning dead. Which doesn't sound right, but that's kind of how it would be. What? Wake up in the morning underwater. Wake up in the morning, your house flattened on top of you. Wake up in the morning in the neighbor's backyard, right? Dead. So anyway, the fact that I did this mockumentary and now this shit is happening has me a little bit rattled, right? This is art becoming life rather than the other way around, which usually is what happens. So we'll see. We'll see what happens. They're saying, some people were saying this could be a category 3, and now they're saying it could be a category 4, and people are already saying it could be a category 5. But one of these days, it's going to be a category 7. And we don't even have that category. We don't even have category 6. They're debating it, but I don't think they'll ever add it to the categories. Because it means that something bad is happening. Why would they create a category 6? Isn't that going to spawn questions? Why do we need a category 6? Category 5 is actually 156 miles per hour and above. Why don't we just keep that? Well, because it's so far above now, we think we need a new category. So they won't do it. Category 5 will be 156 mile per hour winds and above. Even if they're 200 miles an hour. Even if they're 300 miles an hour. That's still category 5. So this could be a category 5. And in my mockumentary, it was just a category 5. I mean, it wasn't. You had like 350 mile an hour winds. But still, legally, it's a category 5. So anyway, it's another video you could watch that I have done, or not. If you live in Florida or any of the other Gulf states, you need to pay attention to Hurricane Helene. Hurricane Helene. If you got family out there, tell them this is a big one. This will be one of the 5 worst hurricanes in U.S. history. Well, I think they said technically the last 30 years, but you know what I mean. Yeah. Read them and weep. And if you live in Florida and they tell you to evacuate, get the fuck out, because you don't want to face that 20-foot storm surge. Because that, as the Weather Service likes to say, is unsurvivable. Wow. Unsurvivable. Okay. Don't forget to like. Don't forget to subscribe. Share the video. Share my mockumentary. Wake people up. Get them going. Get them thinking. I think we need to start reassessing our lives and how we're going to live them and how we're going to survive. Because that's what you have to do. That's your real responsibility, is to survive.